Hello, and welcome to a new video from the steel and metal industry on the topic of stud welding. Tip ignition stud welding? What is tip ignition stud welding? Everyone's heard of it. There are different methods. There's tip ignition stud welding, drawn arc stud welding, and many other processes. Today, we're going to focus only on tip ignition, which is also known as capacitor discharge welding. Why is it called capacitor discharge welding? Because we're not welding with a transformer, a large welding transformer or an inverter, but rather with a capacitor discharge. And as everyone knows, a capacitor discharge happens very, very quickly, about 1.5 to 2 milliseconds. That's how long our welding process takes. So, tip ignition, why is it called that? The stud has a small needle-like tip on its welding surface. And this needle-like tip isn't there to help center the stud in a punch mark. Instead, this tip defines the amount of time the arc burns, the time it takes for the stud to make contact with the workpiece. These studs are available in diameters from 3 millimeters up to 10 millimeters. Although I have to say, 10 millimeters is really very, very thick for this process. We only recommend it up to 8 millimeters, and only for a sheet thickness of, well, let's say 1 millimeter to a maximum of 2.5 millimeters. If you were to weld a stud like this onto a thick beam, onto a 10 millimeter base material, it just wouldn't work. The guns also differ from each other. Specifically, there are contact guns, this is a 1K, and there are gap guns. What's the difference? With a contact gun, I press it down and the stud makes immediate contact. With a gap gun, the stud doesn't make immediate contact. It's a short distance from the workpiece, and only when you trigger the welding process by pressing the button is it then pressed onto the workpiece. And of course, it plunges in much, much faster because it already has a certain amount of force behind it. That's really only used in the aluminum sector. Today, we're welding with chrome maple. For chrome nickel, we use a contact gun, which is actually the most common type anyway. That's why we're demonstrating with a contact gun today. So, what do I need? I need a stud holder. These stud holders, just like the studs themselves, come in many, many different types. There's M3, there's M4, M5, M6, M8, and there's also M10. As I said, we only recommend up to MA. And studs, of course, there are thousands of them in all lengths and many materials from copper-plated steel studs, stainless steel studs, brass studs, all the way to aluminum, also in a wide variety of alloys. And yes, today we're welding a 20 millimeter M6 stainless steel stud. So how do I set all this lock? For that, I need the instruction manual. I need to know which gun I have. We have a 1K, and in the instruction manual, there are two tables, one for the contact gun and one for the gap gun. Then we also distinguished which device we're using. There's the KST 108s, then there's the KST 110, which is the one we're using today. And I just look under contact, M6, and it tells me 120. That's the charging voltage of the capacitors. And it tells me +4. What is +4? +4 is the spring force with which the stud is pressed on. I set the voltage on the device. It should be clear to everyone. You just go down or up again. We said 120. Then I adjust the stud holder. I just insert the stud. At the back of the stud holder, there's a threaded rod. I adjust this threaded rod until I reach a distance or a length of the stud holder with the stud of exactly 50 millimeters. For a gap gun, it's 51 millimeters. The 50 only applies to contact guns. Yeah, then I insert the whole thing in here. Tighten the stud holder. The +4 spring force, I set that back here. I turn this all the way to the left and then 4 turns forward again. 4 complete turns. Then I have to ground the whole thing. We still need a ground. Why do we have 2 ground clamps? It's quite simple. The current, we all learned this at some point, always looks for the easiest path. It would now run from the gun directly to the ground clamp. That means always in one direction. But we're welding with very high currents. And with very high currents, we've all heard this at some point too, magnetic fields are created. A welder calls this arc blow. Arc blow occurs because these magnetic fields deflect the arc, and always in the opposite direction of the ground connection. That's why we take a second cable connected here and weld in between so that the current can be distributed more evenly. We place it on, press it down really firmly, and activate the button. That's all there is to it. Yeah, if I look at this now, I see a soot ring around this stud, and it doesn't really come off. Yeah, you can see these scorch marks, and we don't want that. We want to have a perfect surface. The whole thing should also look nice. And now I'll let you in on a little trick from me as a user, something that's not in any book, and that is we just take a spray bottle, a regular spray bottle, like one you'd use to water your plants at home, and we spray the whole thing with water. Now, some of you might be thinking, for God's sake, we learned that water and welding, oil and welding, those things don't mix. With tip ignition stud welding, this can be quite helpful. I just spray it on. So don't flood it, don't weld underwater, just a thin film. Insert the stud, place it on. You can already hear it pops a little louder. But if I show the comparison now, if we look from above, this is the one without water, and this is the one with water. And we've seen there's significantly less soot, significantly less contamination. The residual contamination we still have here is due to the fact that the sheet metal wasn't cleaned beforehand. And if we now take a hammer and test whether it holds at all, then we'll see. That holds too. Yeah, that's all from us for now on the topic of tip ignition welding. And if you have any further questions, if you have any problems, don't hesitate at www.KÖCO.net. Contact us, call us, write us an email, however you like. We'd be happy to help you further. Until next time, and I thank you for your attention. Bye.